So a horse walked into a bar, and the bartender said, "Why the long face?" Today we'll be talking about BoJack Horseman, a series which I think is one of the best adaptations of a joke that I've seen in the history of television. And this might seem a little bit weird in terms of my content usually being very specifically focused around atheist content and responding to Christians. The reason I wanted to look at BoJack Horseman today is because it really wonderfully captures the idea of death and fear of death, particularly in its final season and particularly in the penultimate episode, The View from Halfway Down. So because there's a spoiler warning here, I'm going to use this opportunity as well to say, hey, please consider hitting the subscribe button if this is the type of content you'd like to be notified of when I do upload. And, remember to hit the thumbs up, the thumbs down, let me know what you thought about the video, and also to leave a comment below and share some of your thoughts about the topic at hand. Because of the nature of this topic, I didn't really feel right or comfortable inserting the general YouTube spiel at the end of the video, so we'll front load it all and do it now. Yes, this is spoilers for BoJack Horseman. It's the second last episode of the series that we're discussing. It reveals information about major characters and in terms of what their position is at this part of the story. So please bear that in mind if you do continue to watch. It is something that, while I don't consider it to spoil the overall story of BoJack Horseman, it certainly does spoil some of the characters' outcomes, particularly since we're talking about an episode that does focus on death. And in the same vein, as that, please consider whether or not you are in a position where you are able to talk about or to think about the idea or subject of death at the moment as well, because I know it can be a very sensitive subject, and I don't want anyone to watch this video and not be in a position where that's potentially the thing that they should be doing at the moment. We all are at different places when it comes to considering these types of things, and while I think this is a important video, what's more important is to make sure that your mental health is your number one priority, and that you're in a place that you are safe in terms of being able to talk about some of these heavier subjects. So please use discretion going ahead. And without further ado, let's go and talk about The View from Halfway Down and what BoJack Horseman can teach us about death and dying.
Your death meant something because it was in the service of a greater cause?
Ah, shucks.
Of course it meant something.
What?
My brother gave the ultimate sacrifice.
See, this is where I get hung up, because when we valorize the idea of sacrifice, of loss, of suffering...
BoJack, don't start with this again.
When we grow up in a house that does that, we internalize this idea that being happy is a selfish act, but sacrifice doesn't mean anything.
So from that clip that we've just seen, I think for anyone that's been in a particularly Christian religion is immediately going to see the point that I'm starting to get at already. And this is that idea that sacrifice is inherently a good or valuable thing in terms of what someone can do with their life. So Butterscotch here is a horse. He is the older brother of BoJack's mother, and he died at a young age in the war when BoJack's mother was still quite young. And because of that, she really idolized and placed a lot of value in the idea of sacrifice in the line of duty for Butterscotch. And in that way, she was able to, maybe she wasn't able to cope, but she used it as a coping mechanism to justify why Butterscotch died at such a young age. Now, because that sacrifice was given that type of value by BoJack's mum, it meant that she held that standard to BoJack. And this is a link I want to make where Christianity in particular, it does a similar thing with the idea of sacrifice. It valorizes or idealizes sacrifice to the point that it becomes an internalized prerogative for us to ensure our lives are valuable by laying down those lives. It's full of language, the doctrine is full of language that reinforces that idea that even when you get baptized and the full water submersion, it's meant to signify the death and of the old person and rising new in Christ, and putting all your earthly desires aside. Personally, that was something that was very strongly resonant within my journey in Christianity, because I determined to be a pastor and I moved forward in the leadership roles, moved from kids' church to youth group to Bible college and doing theology, hermeneutics, Bible history, apologetics, eschatology, soteriology, all that sort of fun stuff. But it became a very strong part of my core identity, internalizing that the idea of sacrificing my own well-being was a noble thing to do, because that's the Christian thing to do. And I really, really liked in this episode of BoJack that that's not immediately accepted. That's actually something that becomes debated by the people at this table in the second last episode of BoJack Horseman. So that's something that I think, I want to investigate that a little bit further, and with the help of some of these characters, why they think that sacrifice in and of itself is not the ultimate goal of life, or is not the way to justify your existence, so to speak. So let's keep going. Let's listen to the next section.
But the funny thing is, it wasn't until I got fired that I actually became myself. I was out of the closet. I was free. I was authentically me. Well, when I wasn't hiding behind some facade, I could be at peace. That's when I really got into philanthropy.
Get pleasure from your charity work, like real deep pleasure?
It dwarfed every other joy in my life.
Doesn't count then. If you got pleasure, it wasn't selfless, and it's only good if it's selfless.
Who made up that rule? I helped people. Who cares if it made me feel good too?
Feeling good is inherently selfish. If I give myself to Christ, truly went down the path.
I don't care for this talk of religion in my house.
So here we move on to the next evolution, or the next step, I guess, in the idea of how we often in society get pressured, or what gets held up anyway, as a idealized or a good example of how to live a life. And it's the idea that Corduroy Jackson, a character who actually dies from autoerotic asphyxiation in one of the episodes. He's a side character, a very minor character, and his appearance here is that he is the embodiment of someone that chased after pleasure in life and was selfish in terms of how he achieved that pleasure, in that he was very inappropriate in when and where he practiced his autoerotic asphyxiation. In this Last Supper situation, Corduroy Jackson appears to have given his life to Jesus. As you see, he pulls out the cross towards the end and cites Christianity as the specific source for this conviction, that anything that makes you feel good inherently becomes a selfish act. So even in Herb's philanthropy, that he states was what brought him peace and what made his life genuinely valuable to him after being a television executive, because that made him feel good, Corduroy Jackson argues that therefore it was not a selfless act, and it was still selfish and still something that was not a positive. Now, that's something that's very directly relatable for me in terms of the ideas that Christianity would put out about someone's life. And that is things as basic as, if you do good works and you tell people you've done good works, that's your reward, that's it. But if you don't tell anyone, so if you don't tell your left hand what your right hand is doing, then your reward is in heaven, and that will be even greater. And so it encouraged you to give privately, to do things without announcing or without making it public, with the idea that you would not get credit now, and that therefore you aren't being selfish, and you could still be rewarded in heaven, because apparently there was some balancing act that God can't give you a recognition in the current world, and all that has to be saved for the next world. This one for me, for whatever reason, the philosophy behind it stuck with me for quite a long time, in that I probably still feel some amount of guilt for doing anything charitable, doing anything positive, and posting about it publicly, or telling people, or bringing it up in conversation, because it devalues my feelings about it, which is ridiculous, and something that I think is a very specific negative aspect of Christianity, and some of the things that I assume others struggle with to a certain point as well, because I'm sure I'm not a unique person in that some doctrines have stuck with me in terms of their impact on my thinking in my life. But it was really good to see this discussion occur because ultimately there's no consensus at this table necessarily. But Herb Kazaz, who is the one that did the philanthropy in his life and is proud of it, he ultimately becomes the person that I'm most closely aligned with in terms of who I want to be like at this table. And that's not to say the other people at this table aren't in some manner relatable for some type of person, and I'm sure there's things people would see in Sarah Ling, BoJack, Butterscotch, even Corduroy Jackson that they would see as a positive thing. But I think ultimately Herb is the one that has the most consistent and the most rational argument for how he ultimately finds peace in his death as well. So let's keep moving, and we're going to briefly look at Sarah Lynn and what her justification is for her life and how she ultimately finds peace, at least in BoJack's mind.
Any of you have a song of yours played in outer space? Anyone? No? Just me? That's what I thought. My hit single, No, 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 parentheses, no means yes, is making its way to Mars. That means something. I will be remembered. That has to mean something. I will be...
So, as I was saying before, BoJack Horseman does not spend a lot of time, if any real significant time, on the idea of religion, and Corduroy Jackson bringing up Christianity is the only one that springs to mind, but it's not like I've been super nerdy about the series and rewatching it ad nauseum. I've seen most episodes once and a few episodes a couple of times. But this is also another idea that I thought was really interesting, particularly from a more humanist atheist point of view. And this is the idea of Sarah Lynn, who is adamant that being remembered is something of value. The fact that she did things that were not important in terms of philanthropy, they weren't important in terms of science or discovery. What she did was entertain. She is a stand-in for Britney Spears, Paris Hilton, that type of pop sensation who at a very young age became very popular and was sort of put through the ringer in terms of how society and how stardom treats the people that, get caught up in it sometimes. But she is adamant that being remembered is of value. And that's often something that when we move away from religion, and it's something that I've adopted to a certain degree as well, as the idea of being remembered being the type of afterlife that you can hope for as an atheist, that you hope that your friends and family that survive you are the people that will take your memory and, the little pieces of yourself that you leave with those that are around you is a form of being able to continue moving forward into the future. As meta as that is, and as I guess ephemeral as that is, that's a genuine way that I transitioned from the idea of heaven and hell, eternal bliss, and then came to this idea of remembrance through those around you. And it's nice to hear someone talk about it, and I'm curious if that's something that anyone else thinks about in terms of, hey, I know there's no afterlife, but the natural afterlife, I suppose, is how we live on, not just genetically, because obviously not everyone chooses to have kids or can have kids, but mimetically. So in terms of how the information or the memories of ourselves that go forward with others that affect and change, and how we influence each other, that actually becomes a legacy that we can leave forward indefinitely in terms of at least the survival of the human species. So it was a really interesting idea for this show, but the show's not done yet. It actually starts to develop this idea a little bit further, and it gets to that really interesting point, because we all know there's an issue with the idea of, hey, at least you'll be remembered. And that's, in terms of, science, we know that an extinction event is not if, it's a when for every species. And even if we become masters of space travel, there's heat death of the universe, and that would not leave anywhere that was survivable for humans. So being remembered or being passed down mimetically, or if not genetically, that's got a limit. That's a finite thing. And so there is a way to deal with that, or at least the show does come to an ultimate conclusion on this, which I'm sure some of you are already there, but let's keep rolling.
Peace? That's someone trying to convince himself of something. Of what? That life has meaning or purpose. That if you check the right boxes and do the dance, then you get a little parting gift at the end. A framed certificate that says, "Congratulations, you've got peace." All the time those people spent trying to do good or help people or be something. I did none of that shit. And yet here I am, same as them. You were the fastest runner in the world. You inspired millions. And yet here I am, same as you.
So here we have the discussion between Secretariat, which is Secretariat, a racehorse that BoJack looked up to as a child, and his father. So it's the body of Secretariat, and the character changes between having the memories and the background of Secretariat and being BoJack's father. Yes, it's a complex show in terms of how the characters interact, so we'll ignore that for now. We'll just call him Secretariat. But he really emphasizes what the conflict of this particular episode is, and that is the idea of why do we live our lives and what can we hope for when our lives are over. And he makes it really clear that the idea that you tick the boxes, you do the right thing, that you will be rewarded at the end of life with peace, is something that he doesn't accept at all. So obviously the character, or at least the amalgamation character here of Secretariat, and I'm pretty sure BoJack Horseman's dad committed suicide too, but the idea that they were in control of their death in a world that they felt had no meaning, that there was nothing waiting for them, that's a really powerful idea in terms of it feels like how society acts. You see a lot of times when people talk about whether or not there's a heaven and hell, often the conflict comes down to, well, if there's no heaven and hell, there's no, or at least not necessarily any justice, because good people die early and bad people die old. And everyone wants the idea of justice, and everyone wants the idea of being able to find peace even after a difficult life. And hope can be something that is powerful, and hope can be something that keeps people going. And Secretariat, or Secretariat here, wants to reject that and argues against it quite vehemently, that it's ridiculous. And when BoJack points out that Secretariat is there, and he's there and he inspired millions because of what he did as a racehorse, Secretariat, he responds with BoJack, who is a very deeply flawed, toxic character in terms of being a negative influence on people throughout his life and not being inspiring, in fact being the opposite. They're both in the same place. They both ended up in the same outcome after their life, regardless of what they did to inspire or not. And you've got people like Herb, who is into philanthropy, and you've got someone that sacrificed themselves in the war, and that the end was the end, and it was all the same for everyone. That's something that's a concept that can be difficult, and I think that's a concept that can actually keep people in a religion, because the alternative just feels too unfair. And I don't know what the answer to that is for atheism, or to, obviously we've got the answer of, well, you don't know what happens when you die, so we can't make any assertions. But somehow, is there a way to provide comfort for the idea that, this is the only life that we have? That, I think, is something important, and this video is not the answer to that question. This video is closer to asking that question than anything else. So,
Life is a never-ending show, old sport, except the minor detail that it ends. The overture's a lifetime, but the show is short. Here with all your family and friends. And don't stop dancing, don't stop dancing till the curtain calls.
So the real overture of this entire episode, and the entire series really, is that life is limited and we need to do what we can while we're alive. So as the song says, keep dancing until the curtain falls. And I think that is the best answer that I can come up with so far. And I can see the apologetic of, well, eternal heaven, that's something that is better than, you'll just be dead one day. And the thing is that it doesn't matter if one idea is more appealing than another. What matters is if an idea is more realistic and more plausible given the information that we know. And the only thing that I can find is plausible about death is that I stop being, and that's it. So to take the idea that life is short and therefore valuable, and to keep dancing, to keep living now and today, and be with my family and friends. I think that's the hope that atheism offers. It's the idea that we can stop investing in a life that we don't even have yet to make sure that we get the most out of the life that we have now. Not worrying about whether or not we're sacrificing enough, not worrying about whether or not we get pleasure out of doing good things, and instead becoming comfortable with the idea that, hey, if I want to do good things with my life, you can be sure as hell I'm going to brag about them because it makes me feel good. And if I brag about it, if I tell people about the good things that I can do or have done, then maybe that'll help people to, do those things themselves and be inspired and be motivated. And, we can share this collective hope as a group that comes from within us instead of external to God. That's what I think at the moment is helping me a lot. I say helping as if this is not a specific struggle necessarily. There's the occasional night I'll be awake, and particularly after I watched this episode at 1 or 2 in the morning, it sort of kept me up because it had me thinking about all this stuff and thinking about death and what it would be like and what I would feel in the time that I'm facing it. So in this particular episode, BoJack himself is facing the idea of, he is on the verge of death for this episode, and the end of the episode will give the outcome to that. But if there's a character that we can take solace from, or a character that I've chosen to take solace from, it is definitely Hope Kazaz. He was confident in who he was. He was proud to be out. He was proud of his philanthropy, and he was happy with how he spent his life. And I think that's admirable, and I think that's something that we can, something that I can look to as an example. And so because of that, I'm going to give Herb the final word on this video and tell us exactly how he views the afterlife, which in this particular scene is him going through the door that symbolizes the ultimate death of these characters. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening if you listen. And I'd love to hear your comments down below on maybe where you're at, maybe what you're thinking about this particular topic. If not, that's all good. I know the topic's not the most upbeat topic, but it was a topic I was really interested in because of this episode and this series as a whole. So, Herb, take us away.
Is it terrifying?
No, I don't think so. It's the way it is, Everything must come to an end. The drip finally stops.
See you on the other side.
Oh, BoJack, no. There is no other side. This is it.